Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, whatever you are in the world. We are starting our season 3 of CXO podcast with Asia CEO community and C-Suite Exchange. My name is Yamilette Cano, and I'm going to be your host for this season. I'm very, very happy to see you all of here online, or if you're only listening also. But you remember, even though this is a podcast, we like your interaction. So if you are watching our videos, if you are listening to the podcast, you can always leave a comment down in the comment sections, or you can reach out directly to Gary and the Asia CEO community. I'm sure they're going to be helping you and answering your questions. Because remember, this community connects the dots between the startups, industry leaders, experts, and innovation. And they also want to encourage business leaders and decision makers to share information, share their knowledge and ideas so we can have best practices in our companies. That's why we created these podcasts, so we can talk with thought leaders around the world. And today, it's not an exception because we are going to have a very interesting speaker. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's podcast. Remember, first podcast of season 3. We have Dr. Peter T. Hale. He is the chairman and CEO of Rapid Research Evaluation, LLC, which is the first minority-owned rapid evaluation firm in the United States. He's a leader, strategic thinker, researcher, evaluator, and published scholar. He holds a doctorate from Columbia University and graduate degrees from Harvard University, the University of Chicago. And he's also a professional certified in impact evaluation in MITx. He has so much experience, so much to share with us. And I know there's a couple of things he would like to tell us about his company today. I read that he wants to disrupt the industry. He wants to make researcher more affordable and be able to have teams working together in an easier and faster way. So please welcome very, very much Dr. Peter Hale. How are you, Doctor?
Very well, thank you. What a fantastic introduction. Thank you so much. Thank you.
How's everything with you? We know you're in the United States. Whereabouts in the United States?
So, well, thank you. Yes, I am in the United States on the West Coast. We call it the satellite of Los Angeles. So I'm actually in Henderson, Nevada. And Nevada is a very, very business-friendly state, which is one of the main reasons why I decided to move here and to operate my business from here. It's Henderson, Nevada. It's a very beautiful city here in the desert, and we're about a 45-minute flight from Los Angeles.
Okay, very convenient. That's great. I've never been. I hope to be able to go and travel and visit very soon. We're all hoping that.
Please do, please do. Very happy to host.
Have you ever been to Hong Kong?
No, I've never been there, but my wife actually was an investment banker in Hong Kong many years ago. She worked for JP Morgan Chase. And so she talks quite beautifully about about Hong Kong, yes. About the people, the culture, the food, the sort of just the experience. And so I'm sure now with having, being sort of a member of this beautiful community, I'm sure I will be in Hong Kong very soon.
Hopefully we can have you. And indeed, people here, they just are so open and very friendly. So when you come, make sure to communicate with us. And I'm sure Gary is going to give you a very wonderful tour.
Yes, Gary, of course, Gary. Gary knows everyone.
Yeah, he's the man to know in Hong Kong.
Yes, he is. So yes, I will most certainly reach out to Gary. But thank you for that.
Super. Well, why don't we start with a little bit of your background, how everything started with yourself and the company, and did you have a vision or it just happened? With us entrepreneurs, sometimes we do have an idea, but because we are trying so many things, we kind of stumble sometimes with opportunities and ideas. So tell us about your journey so far.
Sure. My journey is actually very unconventional, right? Because, my parents actually have a really sort of a sad story because they escaped the genocide in Cambodia and they fled to the United States. They wanted to start a new, better life for their family. I was born in the U.S. And my dad in particular was very much invested in the power of education because, he was able to sort of see firsthand how education really changes people's lives. And so, from the second I was born, I'm sure to like today, he really infused in us the power of not just education, but getting the best education. And then making sure that you use the power of education to move mountains to make the world better. And so I think my journey has to start there because I was really, kind of convinced to move in the direction of working very hard in school, be very competitive because to get into the best schools, you have to be very competitive. You have to work very hard. You have to be focused. You have to have discipline, all that stuff. And I went the academic route. And I always knew since I was a kid, I always knew that I wanted to go and earn a doctorate. I always knew that I wanted to go to the best schools, no matter what it took. And as you know quite well, journeys aren't fluid. They're never smooth, right? There are lots of ups and lots of downs. But I spent the last 20 years or so, I would say last 15 years, really kind of becoming an expert within higher education, teaching classes, conducting research, leading multi-million-dollar research studies, multi-year, multi-million-dollar research studies at the best institutions, the Ivy Leagues, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, Columbia. And in my interactions with, what we're calling clients in the business world, in my interactions with them, I realized that there was a huge market need in research. And in the course of doing this work for 15 plus 20 years, I've had this aha moment where I realized there were a bunch of things missing in the research and development world. Number one, research can be very expensive, right? We're talking about sometimes millions of dollars to conduct a one-year study. It can be very out of touch with the real world, quite frankly. It can be out of touch with the average Joe, right? And then on top of that, I also realized that not all businesses could afford the type of research that was being offered. And so you're absolutely right in the introduction. I wanted to start a company that would disrupt the research and development industry in the United States. And here's why. When you look at the data, right? When we look at global data, $1.7 trillion, 1.7 trillion US dollars are spent just on research and development alone across the globe. In the United States, that's 50 billion US dollars, right? That's in the US. And so there is a huge market for it. But this is where I give and provide value add. The value add for me is being at the intersection of research and development and doing a lot of work around what we're calling diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because in the United States right now, I don't know if you've been following the news, I'm sure you have, there's a lot going on in our country, and diversity, equity, and inclusion has now become an $8 billion industry. And it's hard for me to say that because we can't and we shouldn't put a dollar sign on this kind of stuff. But the reality is that there's a lot of resources out there, and there are a lot of business leaders, CEOs of Microsoft, to the CEOs of Salesforce, to the CEO of name your company in Silicon Valley. They are invested in trying to better understand how research can be leveraged in order to make the workforce more equitable for women, for people of color, and that's where I come in. And that's why I've been able to have great success in my company. It's a very long-winded response. I'm sorry.
Actually, it was very, very clear. And my next question was going to be like, how can you ground this idea? Because for the general public, like myself, and a lot of people perhaps that are listening, I'm sure they're experts in their field, but this topic might sound a little bit too high up in the clouds or too technical. And this is great. It was very, very clear. And you made it very simple for us to understand what is it that you do and what are your objectives and what do you want to achieve. And funny that you mentioned about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're right. There's so many even events now where we're just talking about that. Last year, I was fortunate to be part of an event called Reshape. That it was again an online event, but they have different leadership stages. Let's call it the online stage, where Barack Obama was part of one of the panels and all these industry leaders. But they had one specific stage for 2 days where people were only talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in their companies, as you were saying, from Google to smaller startups. So indeed, it's the talk of the town, and it's very great that this is happening. So thinking about your objectives, the vision and the mission that you have in your company to make research more affordable, available, and have a bigger bandwidth for the teams. How do you make it easier for people to understand that this is something that it's needed and it's not only a nice thing to have, but it should be a must?
Right. So, I can't speak for Hong Kong, or I'm familiar, I've worked in the Asia Pacific. I've worked in ASEAN for a few years. So I'm familiar with the lay of the land there, but I'm much more familiar with the United States and the research market here. So I'll speak on behalf of the United States. In this country, as you can see, there is tremendous investments from, board members, chairmanships, CEOs, all the way down to, just regular employees. There's a huge investment in the power of research, the power of data, the power of evidence to make informed decisions. In America, and here in this country, we say data-informed decision-making. Data-informed decision-making. It's kind of a buzzword, whether you're working with corporations, whether you're working with nonprofit organizations or government. Data-informed decision-making is a huge ordeal in the United States. So I'll speak from that perspective, right? So it's kind of understood that if you want to operate a business successfully, regardless of the size of your company, you must use research, you must use data, you must use numbers to make decisions. And that's where companies like mine come in. Because when we think about research, right, research, it's not the same. It's not, it depends on who's conducting the research, how they were trained, where they were trained, how are they using the data. So for us, because I went through such a rigorous process to sort of earn my degrees and earn my master's and then my doctorate, I went through such a rigorous process. And then you put on top of that 15 to 20 years of work experience. There are some things that I know that adds value to businesses and the clients that I help in particular. So the best way to answer that question is to say this. In the United States, we understand that research is a priority. However, the thing that we're working harder around in this country is recognizing that not all data and not all evidence are the same, right? And what I'm trying to say is that you have to use rigorous methods. Like my firm, we use everything from advanced statistics to predictive analytics to running pre-post tests to qualitative interviews to focus groups. We used a whole batch of methods to then triangulate information to zero in on the solution for our clients, which is why I think we've been so successful. So it's very much built into our system here as a country. So it's not difficult whatsoever to get people to buy in. What's harder to get people to buy in on, quite frankly, is getting them to invest long term, because most people want to use research for short fixes, and that presents a lot of issues which I'm happy to talk about later.
Yes, I love to hear about that. But before we go into more in depth, this question may be a little bit controversial, but it comes from my side, working in the soft skills industry. How do you humanize data?
That's beautiful.
Data is very valuable, but where do you
absolutely.
the human part?
Absolutely. And this is the sort of second component to what I was saying about my firm and what makes us unique. When I introduced my firm, I said, we're at the intersection of research and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what I didn't say was at the heart of it all is I do my work to improve, to maximize, to optimize qualities of life for people. I use research for social impact. I use research to make sure that that staff members feel that they feel a sense of belonging, that they feel a sense of care and empathy from their CEOs and their organization. That's the type of research I do. The book that I have here that I'm very unabashedly kind of putting up, Critical Humanity, which I'll get into later if you're interested. But this book is about how do you center the sense of compassion and empathy in leadership. And I've written case studies on how some corporations are doing that well. I've written on how the United Nations may or may not do it well. And then I give case studies on how other leaders are doing it well. So to answer your question, it's built into my work, right? Because there are two things that business owners care about. One is maximizing business value, helping our clients maximize business value, which is essential. But the other thing we often do not talk about is the importance of also maximizing this human potential, maximizing this sense of humanity, because we cannot separate, and you might disagree with me, but when we think about businesses, we cannot separate the humanness within whatever corporation you work for, right? We're all men, we're all women, we have various identities. And so the important thing to think about is how do we use research and data and evidence to, again, improve the qualities of life for people, across this planet. So.
I don't disagree at all. Actually, I'm a true believer and a cheerleader, similar as you are, with we can't do only business and then personal. It, as you say, it's an intersection because we're always going to be humans. We were people first, and then we became professionals. So it's about that balance. Do you find it hard in the US, as you're an expert in that market, for leaders to understand this notion of, it's not only about data, it's not only about humanity or empathy, there should be a balance, and we should try to develop this kind of, I like to call it radical empathy leadership. So it's not only having it, but practicing in our companies. Do you find it difficult that in the US?
Absolutely. And I'll give you some very concrete examples. So this is interesting, right? Because, I know the United States often has very different sort of views from wherever you are. Maybe if you're from China, you think of the US a certain way, positive or negative. From Hong Kong, it could be positive or negative. Africa, wherever you may be, right? There are certain viewpoints of this country that can sometimes be good, sometimes be bad. But let's focus on the good, right? Let's focus on the good. And what I do know is that this country has had a long history of exporting what we call cultural capital. So by cultural capital, we mean, it's probably well known on all four corners of this earth that Nike is a very powerful global brand, that Google is a powerful brand, that Starbucks is a powerful brand. So these are all brands that have been born in the United States that have then been exported out into the other parts of the world. The practices that they bring into their companies are also, and the cultures within their companies have also been exported to other parts of the world. This sense of cultural capital is very important. And here's why. It is my firm belief, and we're not really talking about this well enough, I don't think, but it's my firm belief. And maybe this is where being an academic by trade really is helpful, because you start looking at trends. But it's my firm belief that there's a next wave of cultural capital that's about to get exported very significantly outside of the United States. And that's this notion of what we're calling social impact. We're calling it triple bottom line investing. We're calling it people, planet, profit. Klaus Schwab, I don't know if you know him, but he's the executive chairman and founder of the World Economic Forum. He just published a book called Stakeholder Capitalism. And under that really kind of fancy name is essentially saying that people, planet, and profit, that triple bottom line investing, is no longer just a figment of our imagination. This social impact is here to stay, and corporations that invest heavily in this idea are not only going to see extreme gains in their companies, but they're also going to see extreme gains in the level of satisfaction from their employees. Social impact is what I do, right? I've been doing this for a very long time. And the reason why this is so important to talk about is because it would be extremely beneficial, I think, for each country, whether it's Hong Kong or China or Singapore, but it would be so beneficial for each country and the leaders of said country to not only think about what social impact means in their own context, but how do we invest heavily in social impact? How do we scale the impact or scale the progress that's being made from these types of social impact investments? I'll give you an example. There's a case study, chapter 6 of my book. I write about Just Capital, JUST Capital. This is a fantastic organization, and I would certainly point your viewers to this organization. This company started in 2013 and was founded by Paul Tudor Jones II, who was a really famous hedge fund manager here in the US, along with Deepak Chopra, who is sort of a spiritual guru, Ariana Huffington. So some very big names came together in 2013 and said, and very likely as a result of the global financial crisis, they said, corporations have to do business differently. Okay, so everyone was in agreement that corporations have to do business differently. But the question was, what do we do? And how do we do it? So in 2013, they started this company called Just Capital. And what Just Capital does is they rank all the major corporations in the United States, from Microsoft to Google to whatever. Over 100 corporations are ranked based on their social impact. And can you guess which company is number one?
That's a tricky one.
Take a wild guess. Think about leadership and think about global branding.
Well, I believe a lot of people would think Google because it's been the epiphany of openness and leadership, but I'm not sure that would be.
Yeah, they're there. They're almost there, but it's actually Microsoft. And Microsoft is consistently number one. And, regardless of what's going on with Bill Gates in his personal life, think about what Bill Gates and his wife or his then wife, think about what they've been able to do after Bill Gates left Microsoft. Think about what he's done globally. All he's invested in, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars each year on social impact investing. Yeah. So in this country, to sum it up, I think we're going to export this next wave of cultural capital, and it's my firm belief it's social impact investing. It's the stuff that I do every day.
One thing to remember for all of our viewers and listeners, social impact. Are these transferable? When someone, let's say someone wants to hire you for some research here in Hong Kong, I know your firm is based in the US and you're expert in the US market. However, let's say I heard about you and I know that you are so good and I really would like to try the services. Is this possible? Is it transferable knowledge from the US market to an Asian market, or do we have to tweak some of the elements when it comes to researching and applying that research into our market?
No, it's a fantastic question. It's let's say replace me with an accountant, replace me with a legal professional, replace me with a CFO, replace me with someone with a very technical background, and that's essentially me, right? So regardless of where we were trained, regardless of where we're operating, whether it's Hong Kong or the United States, the reality is that I have a set of expert skills that can be applied across markets, across contexts, across countries, right? Because the type of research that I do, when we talk about interviews and focus groups and statistics, that stuff I would hope is being learned in the universities in Hong Kong. I hope those students are learning those methods. So yes, it's very transferable, right? What isn't transferable, and this is why having someone who understands the power of diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is important, because I think one of the bad things I would say that's often exported with American idealism and ideology and culture is this sense of hubris, this arrogance that comes with the United States. And I know that because when I lived overseas, I've lived in Asia for many years, I've lived in Africa and all these other countries, my friends and my colleagues would always say, why is this sense of hubris so eminent? And I would say, I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason for it. But this sense of hubris cannot come from America into Hong Kong. Having a diversity, equity, and inclusion background essentially forces me to put aside my assumptions and my biases, still holding on to my strong technical research skills, but putting aside all of my biases as an American and really understanding the local context, right? If I'm going to do research for, let's say, company X in Hong Kong, and they say, hey, we need a market analysis because we want to enter, let's say, Southeast Asia. Well, the first thing I would say is, okay, that's great, that's my expertise. But the second thing I would say is, let me do two things. One, let me do a landscape analysis of the country. So I would fly into the country, or I would contact locals and get lots of knowledge from them. And then I would hire locals to work alongside myself. And I think that's why there's always tremendous value that my firm offers to clients. Whether, it's not Hong Kong, obviously, but definitely in the United States, I take that approach.
Can't have a cookie cutter approach, just copy paste from one thing to the other. That makes me think about one quote that one of my very good friends, David Date, said once to me. He's a Taiwanese American, and he would say, if I'm in Asia or any place around Asia Pacific, and I start speaking up like an American, I would be the loudest in the room. But then if I go to the US and I try to apply that approach, my Asian approach into the US, then I would be the quietest in the room.
Yes.
It's all about adaptability and knowing that audience and how can you touch base with the reactions that they're going to have. If I'm a startup, and we know a lot of our founders and CEOs here, they are very successful and perhaps running very big corporations, but we also have those who are starting and they have their dreams or their hopes are very high. If I'm a startup, how can I afford and how can I put aside that budget for the research that is so valuable and important for the well-being of my company?
That's, so you got cut off for a bit, so I'm going to ask you to repeat the question really fast.
Sorry, I was saying that if I'm a startup, I'm just starting with my dreams and my hopes. And I know that there's so many things that I have to focus on. But I still also know that research is super important for the long term of the positive results in my company. How can I afford, or how can I take advantage of this research in a way that is financially appealing for me as a startup, but it's also going to help in the long run? I know you want to make it affordable, but what would be the first steps to reach out to you and a company like yours?
Sure. So, my clients range from like big corporations to really small startups with 2 people, right? So I have a really broad range of clients, and I have 15 projects currently. And it's all, they range in different size and different budgets, multi-million to a few $100,000. And I'm always happy to work with small startups because I get very excited working with, because you and I, we're entrepreneurs. We want to solve problems. We see a problem, we want to solve it, we want to throw solutions at it, and hopefully it sticks. So for me, working with startups, it's enjoyable. But what I would say to them is, let's look at your budget. Let's look at what you're trying to do with your organization or your company. And for me, I have a soft heart. Like, that's one thing you will always know about me. And if I think that organization is really trying to do good, like they're really in it for the good of humanity, I will significantly chop my fees, and I've done that. And so sometimes there's that sense of pro bono that you have to take on, and as a company, you don't want to, you don't want to put your company at risk and take on a lot of pro bono work, right? But you have to know, okay, I can handle one project that's 3 months long, that's going to take up or burn X amount of hours. So again, let's look at your budget. How much, and I've said this before to some small startups, I'm like, how much do you really have, right? Like, let's be like, I'm here to help you. How much do you really have? And if they're honest and they show me their budget, then, I'll work with them. But that's offset by some of the bigger corporations and organizations that I bring in. So, yeah. And I think I want other leaders, if they take anything away from this interview, the one thing I want leaders at any C-suite exec, what I want them to take away from this is, we have to do better as executives and as leaders. We have to do better about finding the middle ground between business value and human value, because without that, we're not going to move this country, not move this world forward, or even your respective country. You're not going to move it forward. And so, I hope I was able to sort of communicate that to your audience, up until this point.
Totally, Doctor. And I also agree with you again. I'm agreeing with you with the part that it has to be both ways, from the leadership side to be open and to understand that human value, but also from the startups or the entrepreneurs that want to get into something that perhaps they think it might be too expensive, or it might be, I'm afraid of this, just to be honest, transparent, and open. And people are willing to help, especially in a community like this one, Asia CEO, that people are here to help. So don't be shy to say, this is what I have. What can we do with this budget? How can we work together and collaborate?
That's right. And Gary, sorry, I was going to say, and Gary has created this fantastic global network, and we're just a LinkedIn message away. So if you have a research or an evaluation related question, don't, feel free to shoot me a message, and and hopefully I can get back to you, and I'm sure I will. So thank you.
That is the beauty, and we really appreciate that, Doctor. I want to go back to your comment before, saying that it's not difficult for people to understand that research is very valuable, but it's difficult for them to get the notion of long term.
Yes.
How do we do that? How do you approach companies and individuals to understand this notion?
Harvard is one of my alma maters, and so we've had some fantastic scholars who've come out of that institution, and some amazing research. And one of the research that I'm going to talk about, like, very quickly, is this notion of adaptive leadership. Right? I don't know if folks in Hong Kong are talking about this, but it's this notion of, are you leading as a technical person, or are you leading, meaning that here's a box, I'm checking this off, here's a box I'm checking off, here's a box I'm checking off, but I lack tremendous creativity, but I lack tremendous innovation, but I lack tremendous empathy. Are you that kind of leader, or are you an adaptive leader, meaning you're leading from the inside out, meaning that you can lead with an amazing set of soft skills, meaning that you can relate to people and empathize with people, right? So I'm going to answer that question by saying this. We have to change the way we think in order to change the way we do things. And if we can't change the way we think about research, then we're never going to do it. And if we do it, we probably won't do it well. If we change the way we think, we will change our actions. And I'm a firm believer in this. I'm a huge believer in this. So to get people thinking more creatively and more powerfully and more innovatively about leveraging research, data, and evidence to make informed decisions, they have to sit down and as a leader and say, okay, I don't know anything about research. Let me understand the nuts and bolts of it, number one. And number two, let me do some research myself, quite honestly, to understand how do I employ this powerful tool, this powerful weapon to bring tremendous value to my company. I would say that's the first thing they need to do. And if they can get to that step, then you'll have endless amounts of aha moments. Mm-hmm. And then from there, light bulbs will go off. And then from there, you will bring profit into your company. It's almost that linear, quite frankly. And I speak from experience, so that's how I would answer that question for you.
I'm loving this. You are hitting all the points that I believe too. Talking about change and adaptability, has the global situation impacted your business and your teammates? And what are the things that you've been doing internally and externally to help them move forward from the global conversation of this pandemic?
Yeah, it's funny. I think COVID-19 has impacted us in some way, shape, or form, right? It's something that it's here to stay. I always jokingly say this to my wife, it's in our nature to evolve. We've evolved since the dawn of time. So even with COVID-19, we're going to evolve and adapt to that tremendous change. The question is, how fast are you going to do it? Because there are leaders and there are laggards. So for us as a company, obviously, I have an executive office, all my meetings are, I take all my meetings there. I have a conference room. Obviously with COVID-19, we have to go completely virtual. And then at that moment, you have to say to yourself, what do I do to add value to this company? And how can I continue to add value to my clients? I hope every single C-level on this listening to this interview thinks that way. I truly hope so, because those thoughts and those questions should never leave your mind. Because when those thoughts and those questions don't leave your mind, then when you're hit with the pandemic, then immediately I went to, okay, we have to go virtual, fine. I would close our offices. I'm back into our office, thank God. But I had to shut down my offices for a year. I had to talk to clients. Clients, they have clients themselves. They weren't getting paid, so they couldn't pay me. So I had to get very creative. Well, I'll tell you what, when you're creative and you're an entrepreneur and you're innovative, you're going to find ways to bring in new clients, even if that means changing the lay of your company and what you actually do. For us, during the pandemic, I went to what I know best, which is to network and to build. So I went back to, I have a very broad network of colleagues, and I was able to build with people. And through those relationships, I was bringing in contracts even during the pandemic. It's hard work, it's some luck, but it's a lot of hard work and a whole lot of optimism. But then 1 year after the pandemic, I saw my business increase by 400%, all because I've this focus on virtual and the push for research, the push for data, push for evidence. Can you guess why? It's because they realized that they needed some structured way to make decisions, because the old ways of doing things was no longer profitable for them. So they had to hire a firm like mine out to help them. So it's being adaptable, being nimble on your toes, constantly thinking about how do I bring value to my firm and also to my clients. Never stop thinking about that.
I was also saying, would add to add, also being fearless about asking our connection.
Yes, yes. There's a sense of fearlessness, I would say, in all of the amazing entrepreneurs that I've met in my life, right? And not all entrepreneurs are cut the same, but for me, the most amazing entrepreneurs have always been folks who are fearless, folks who are willing to take risk, calculated risk, but risk. And I always say to people, if you don't have the stomach to take calculated risks, you should not be in this business. It's not smooth sailing all the time. But when there is a downward dip, your entrepreneurial skills need to kick in even harder in order to bring opportunities and profits to your company. So I agree with you, fearlessness.
Jumping with a little peekaboo. So as you're saying, being strategic, not just falling on your face, but still jumping. Disruption. And I would like to break my question into two, because one, it's very targeted to the fact that you're disrupting the industry to make it more affordable. So how are you doing that? And the other part would be, how do you disrupt the traditional idea of creativity? We're talking about creativity a lot, but a lot of people would always think, I'm not creative because I'm not an artist or a singer or a dancer. Yep. But creativity could have many other definitions. So how do you disrupt the affordability of your research, and how can we disrupt the creativity idea?
Sure. So this is where the word rapid is essential in my company. I don't know about Hong Kong, but here in the United States, some research firms don't have the best reputation because they're charging people an arm and a leg, $100,000 for a 1 month study, a 2 month study, or, sometimes $1 million and $10 million for a 12-month study, and they drag it out. And for me, there are two problems with that. Number one, research doesn't have to be that expensive. On the whole, on average, it doesn't have to be that expensive. And number two, 12 months that's a long time. I don't know who has the patience to wait 12 months for answers. I certainly don't. Do you? I can barely wait 12 hours for answers. Ask Gary, he knows very well. So for me, it's saying two things. It's let's cut up. It's like writing a book. If you write a book, I've never seen a book in which there's only one chapter. I've seen a book with multiple chapters, and sometimes books with lots of chapters read more efficiently. And I use that same logic for my business. And it's to say, we can take something that's 12 months in duration and then chop it up into 3-month segments. Not only is it more affordable, but you're going to get faster results. And sometimes, depending on the type of research, we can do that even faster. We can do a 1-week turnaround, 2-week turnaround, 4-week turnaround at a quarter of the cost or a fraction of the cost. And you have to say to yourself, why hasn't anyone else thought about this? And I think, honestly, it's that human element that I've been talking about all night, and that is, or all morning for you. I think if you really care about improving the qualities of life for people, and you really do want to help, you're going to find ways to make it accessible to people of all stripes. And that's how the idea came to me,
Wow, chopping it up. I like that. And as you're saying, we want fast answers. So it makes a little bit more sense that we're just getting little drips of information rather than just having to wait for so long. And then how do you do with creativity? How do you teach people the notion that creativity is way more than just the dictionary definition?
No, that's absolutely right. Look at what TikTok is doing to the world. Look at what Instagram's doing to the world. You have all these creative artists who, before TikTok, weren't able to express themselves and monetize that creative expression. And yet now, with TikTok, they can, with a decent amount of following, they can monetize their creativity. So that's disruption in a classic example. Because no longer do we have to wait for the traditional media outlets to demonstrate and showcase our creativity. There are other media platforms, social media platforms that's welcoming that level of creativity. So two things are happening. There's clear disruption of a dinosaur industry, the media, and then two, artists and creative folks with a tremendous amount of creativity can now express themselves and share their expressions with the world, and then monetize on it. So let's get back to this notion of creativity. When you look at PISA scores, right? PISA scores are like the global test scores that OECD, they look at to compare how students from across the globe are comparing to each other. When you look at the United States, we don't do very well around math. We are always like lagging. Singapore is always up there, Finland.
Yeah.
But when you look at creativity and problem solving, we're almost always up at the #1 spot. We're always at the top. And that's because in this country, we really value freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom to create, freedom to be ourselves. And so, I don't know who's listening to me right now and where in the world they are, but from where I'm sitting, creativity is kind of built into our DNA, So, and then disruption is built in some of our DNAs. So for me, it's very fluid to be able to talk about this the way I'm talking about it.
Creative research, that notion is such a great notion. How do you see your company growing in the next few months? I don't want to say 12 or whatever. What's the future for you in research?
Yeah, so for us, the next logical step for us is to really push a new vertical that I've been thinking about for a while, and that's providing training, hybrid training, to different corporations, to different organizations. And we're going to use a virtual platform that I'm actually having someone build out at the moment, a virtual platform, and we'll still do face-to-face. So for us, it's helping people and recognizing, right, again, that human-centered leadership component. It's recognizing that not everyone has access to the type of research training that I've had or some of the members of my team have. So now it's saying, how do we share the skills that we have so that we help other organizations create their own value, right? And so providing that level of training will do just that. In this country right now, I've alluded to this probably prematurely at the beginning of this interview, but I think it's very timely to bring it back up here right now. We are invested in research. The next question for us is, how do we improve the quality of the evidence that comes from that research? And my training is going to be, it's really focused on that, and there's a huge market for it in this country. It's, in fact, it's a very, very needed part of the market. And so I'm very excited to move into that new vertical.
That's exciting indeed. I can wait to see that platform, Doctor. How can me as a non-expert, how can I understand quality versus quantity? How do I know if I'm going into the right direction or not? Obviously, all of our viewers, listeners, they should know now to get in touch with you. But if I'm a newbie, I don't know where to start. How do I know that the research I've been given, it has quality?
That's a really good question. And this is why providing training is important. Because if you haven't been trained in it, it's hard to, it's like, I want to give you a set of glasses that you can then wear to see clear. But without these glasses, through this training, you're likely not going to be able to see clearer. And it's practice. A lot of it is repetition and practice, right? Like anything else in life. If you want to be a classical pianist, you have to practice, right? The same thing with research, same thing with law, same thing with finance. You have to practice it. So someone who's kind of like fresh-eyed and has no experience in research, it's very hard to discern. This is why companies like mine exist, and this is why we actually thrive. But through training, you will be able to access those tools, and you will be able to, using the matrix as an example, see the zeros and ones more clearly, quite frankly. So it's a lot of practice, a lot of repetition, and asking all the right questions. But it's certainly, and I'm so glad, that's such an important question that you just asked, because I think people always, they sort of misconstrue like Google research with like the kind of research that I do professionally, right? And there's different. Like, let me start there. You cannot go to Google and say, what's the cause of global warming? You might be able to find some really nice reports that's going to help you, but chances are you don't know how to discern fake news from real news. So practice, training. If you can't do that, call someone like me and we can help.
At least we should know that we should do our own research and finding the right company, agency, or partner to give us better results. Oh, it's been wonderful, and time flies. I'm sure you have so many other things to tell us, but I would like to ask you for our last question, a wrap-up question. What would you like to leave our audience with? What would be the key points that you want them to remember and also to understand about yourself and your company?
Thank you. Well, first of all, before I say that, I just want to thank you. You're a fantastic moderator, by the way. Don't be surprised if I call you to help me moderate some other stuff. You've asked fantastic questions. Bravo to you, and bravo to Gary for finding you. I want to leave them with two things, right? I alluded to one earlier, but I want to come back to it. And I want to say two things. So the first is, as a leader, as an executive, we need to have deeper, harder, more honest questions about that intersection between business value and human value. Let's get better about that, because if we do that in the aggregate, we're going to move mountains. We'll optimize our net profit, but we're also going to make this world better. Please focus on that. I would say that is essentially number one. Number two is, I think, I don't know if in Hong Kong you have like social identifiers, but in America, I'm Asian, so I call myself Asian American. And if you're Black, you call yourself Black American, et cetera. And as an Asian American, these types of networks and this type of call is so valuable to me. Why? Because on either side of that hyphen, Asian American, exists an individual who understands the power of Asia and also the power of the United States. And I bring, this level of cultural nuance to where, remember, I don't bring that American hubris, right? I understand, I respect the Asian culture. I know how to navigate diplomatically in Asia, but also bring the power and the tools of American Western research to help companies optimize their value and optimize their gains. So that second thing is very important, because not everyone can do that. You have a lot of Americans in Hong Kong, for example, but they might not fully understand that cultural nuance unless they've been there for a few years. Well, someone who's Asian American can move back and forth, can navigate between Asia Pacific and the United States very fluidly. So it's a privilege and an honor to be a part of this wonderful community, the Asia CEO community, and I'm excited to see where this space takes us all. And I again thank you so much for this fantastic interview. I'm so excited.
Oh wow, it's been such a great pleasure for me too. You are also a wonderful speaker, I have to say. As I said in the beginning, you are making such a complex notion for a lot of us very simple and very, let's say, affordable to understand, to tap into that quote of yours. As you're saying, social impact, connecting, understanding, let's not be afraid of our roots, and the power of bringing the background and what we learned from our culture into another culture and the adaptability of it. So the diversity, equity, and inclusion of our own humanism. Thank you very much, Dr. Peter. Again, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you to our viewers, listeners, everybody in the world. Remember to always be in touch with Asia CEO community. If you're not part of the community, you can always reach out to Gary. You can find him anywhere but on LinkedIn, social media, YouTube. And we will see you at our next session. Remember, this is season 3 of CXO podcast. Thank you and see you next time. Please stay in touch.